The Klondike is buzzing, and not just from the sound of dredges. Whispers are spreading through Dawson City that Kevin Beets has been making secret moves behind Tony's back. Deals no one can trace. Gold shipments slipping under the radar. Trucks heading down dark roads toward claims far beyond Tony's reach. It's the kind of talk that can fracture an empire, and this empire belongs to the king of the Klondike himself, Tony Beets. Before we dive deeper, smash that like button and subscribe, because this story is about to uncover secrets no one saw coming. It began with hushed conversations in town, miners trading stories about unmarked loads of pay dirt that never showed up on official records. Supply trucks were spotted rolling out past midnight, their drivers tight-lipped about where they were going. For decades, Tony Beets has ruled with iron control. Every ounce of gold accounted for, every claim either bought, crushed, or shut out. But now suspicion is growing that something is moving beneath the surface, and the source isn't an outside rival, it's someone far closer. Tony's name has always carried fear and respect. The man built his fortune by outlasting, outspending, and outmuscling anyone who dared stand in his way. Rivals collapsed, claims changed hands, and the Klondike itself seemed to bend to his will. His empire wasn't just about gold, it was about dominance, and for years, that dominance was absolute. But the one thing Tony never expected was a challenge from inside his own camp, a challenge rising quietly, step by step. Because for Kevin, this has been building for years. Living in the shadow of the king meant his technical skill and leadership were always second to Tony's name. Crews say Kevin grew restless, watching his work dismissed as just another cog in Tony's machine. He began slipping away, meeting quietly with claim owners his father once drove out. Conversations behind closed doors, hushed exchanges near equipment yards, familiar faces from the past suddenly back in the picture. Piece by piece, Kevin was carving out his own path, and those whispers in Dawson City started to sound less like rumors and more like strategy. And in the Yukon, strategy means gold, and gold means power. For Kevin, this wasn't just about money. It was about leverage, independence, and a gamble that could tilt the entire balance of the Beets empire. And as his plans took shape behind closed doors, subtle signs began to surface. Equipment appearing in old overlooked claims, murmurs among miners who hadn't worked in years, hints that someone was quietly rewriting the rules without Tony noticing. Evidence began surfacing that Kevin Beets wasn't just restless. He was orchestrating something calculated, something dangerous. The first whispers pointed toward Hunker Creek, a stretch of ground Tony had long dismissed as unprofitable. Yet suddenly, rival activity surged there, equipment appearing where none had been before. Miners who had been all but forgotten were suddenly back in the game, and behind them, insiders claimed, was Kevin. The younger Beets had struck a secret partnership, the kind of backroom deal that Tony never allowed under his watch. Gold from these hidden operations wasn't reported, wasn't logged, and most importantly, wasn't passing through the Beets books. The mechanics of the deal were as bold as they were reckless. The rival crew needed machines to dig deeper, faster, and Kevin had access. Excavators, fuel, and even specialized wash plant parts began vanishing from Tony's inventory. When they resurfaced days later, they bore the grime of use from pay dirt that had no connection to official Beets ground. Insiders claimed Kevin funneled not only equipment, but men. Workers shifting quietly to Hunker Creek on weekends, moonlighting on a claim Tony never sanctioned. The payoff was staggering. 40% of the profits promised directly to Kevin, an unheard-of cut for someone who, by bloodline, already stood to inherit one of the richest mining empires in the Klondike. But this wasn't about waiting to inherit. It was about carving his throne now, undermining his father before the crown could ever be passed. The design of this hidden partnership was deliberate. It wasn't simply another side hustle, it was structured in a way to pull strength away from Tony's own operation. Every gallon of fuel that vanished, every ounce of dirt processed elsewhere, every worker distracted from the main camp weakened Tony's numbers. The rival crew didn't just gain, they gained by taking directly from the king. The whispers grew louder. Kevin wasn't rebelling by walking away, he was challenging the throne from the inside. Tony began noticing irregularities, small at first, but impossible to ignore. Fuel consumption spiked without explanation. Entire tanks drained faster than projected. Fuel was the lifeblood of the operation, and Tony prided himself on knowing every detail, every ratio. Now the math no longer worked. He demanded answers, but the explanations offered by the crew were vague, fumbling, the kind of half-truths that set his temper ablaze. Soon, it wasn't just fuel. Excavators logged as idle were turning up with fresh tracks of use. Graders returned with dirt crusted in places that didn't match any known pit on his claim. Tools disappeared for days at a time, reappearing battered, with no one willing to admit where they had been. Most damning of all were the numbers. Gold tallies, the sacred accounting that Tony demanded with military precision, stopped lining up with the volume of pay dirt. Buckets went missing. Cleanups that should have yielded rich ounces came back light, inexplicably short of their projections. In Tony's world, numbers didn't lie. Men did. Yet his first instinct was never to suspect Kevin. In his mind, betrayal came from competitors, from old enemies lurking in Dawson's bars, waiting to pounce. He thought sabotage came from outside hands, slipping into his empire. The thought that his own son might be orchestrating it was unthinkable. Still, the pieces were on the board, scattered but visible to anyone willing to connect them. Trucks seen at odd hours, equipment out of place, tallies too low. And while Tony refused to believe it at first, the crew began whispering. Men loyal to the camp muttered that something was wrong, that the king was blind to what everyone else could already see. The sabotage wasn't from the outside. It was moving under his roof. Meanwhile, in Dawson City, the buzz turned into open talk. Locals claimed to have seen Kevin at unmarked sluice setups, his presence confirmed by more than one late-night drinker stumbling out of the taverns. Shadows of unlicensed operations glowed faintly under floodlights, far from Tony's official claims, and Kevin's name was attached to them with increasing certainty. The tavern talk became bolder. Kevin wasn't just sneaking around, he was building. A miner plotting his own kingdom, far from the shadow of his father, was a tale too irresistible not to spread. Dealings in town added more fuel. Gold dust, unrefined and unregistered, traded in cash deals outside the licensed exchanges, bypassing every rule Tony lived by. For decades, Tony's power had rested not only on his production, but on the iron order he imposed. Every ounce accounted for, every shipment watched, every deal tied back to his control. Now, a shadow economy was pulsing under his nose. The Beets name still carried weight, but for the first time, it carried whispers of weakness. The Yukon thrives on rumor, but this was different. The whispers were not of Tony's dominance, but of cracks in his throne. Rivals smelled blood. Locals leaned in closer, eager to trade stories, and crews, once unquestioningly loyal, began to wonder whether the king of the Klondike was losing his grip. At the center of it all, Kevin kept moving, his plans hidden in plain sight, the empire shifting one piece at a time as the line between rumor and reality blurred more with every passing day. And as whispers spread, the tension that had been simmering beneath the surface began to boil over. Eyes that once avoided confrontation now watched every command, every decision, waiting for cracks to show. It wasn't long before the pressure erupted where it mattered most, between father and son. Tony's temper became a storm that rolled across the camp daily. Every small mistake, every delay, every misstep from the crew sparked explosions of rage. But more often than not, his fury was aimed at Kevin. The clashes between father and son grew so loud that engines were drowned out by their shouting. Tony barked orders with the authority of a man who had built an empire from frozen ground. But Kevin resisted, pushing back harder with every command. What once passed as routine tension in a family-run operation was shifting into open defiance. Monica and Mike were trapped in the middle. Monica, sharp-eyed and steady, tried to keep peace where there was none, her words falling flat as the rift deepened. Mike, caught between loyalty to his father and solidarity with his brother, withdrew, his silence speaking louder than words. The siblings watched as the Beets dynasty began to fracture, their camp splitting into factions. Some crew members remained fiercely loyal to Tony, unwilling to cross the king who had made their paychecks possible. Others, drawn by Kevin's quiet charisma and promises of change, began to side with him in whispers. The loyalty that had once united them under Tony's iron grip was now dividing them like cracks racing through ice. Arguments turned into full-blown eruptions. Decisions that once took minutes stretched into hours of shouting and accusations. Crew meetings devolved into shouting matches between Tony and Kevin, the rest of the workers standing awkwardly in the background, unsure which side they would eventually need to choose. A dynasty that had long presented itself as untouchable was no longer united. It was splintering before everyone's eyes. And in the Yukon, a split family was as dangerous as open warfare. Then came the proof, or at least what passed for it. Leaked photos circulated in Dawson City, showing Kevin at a fuel depot, speaking with men known to be connected to rival miners. Grainy but unmistakable, the images spread quickly, pinned up on tavern walls, passed hand to hand, with smirks and whispers. The rumor was no longer rumor, it had a face. Not long after, video surfaced of unmarked trucks hauling loads of dirt from claims that Tony had no record of owning. The license plates were blurred by dust, but the trucks themselves bore the distinct markings of Beets equipment. Few things traveled faster than gossip in the Klondike, but this was no ordinary gossip. This was evidence, captured in headlights and shadows, tying Kevin to ground his father had never claimed. Financial irregularities soon followed. Records surfaced that showed shipments of gold unaccounted for in official refinery channels. The books didn't balance, and the discrepancies pointed not outward, but inward. To outsiders, it was clear enough. Kevin was running gold outside Tony's empire. To those inside the Beets operation, it was a bombshell. Though none of it was definitively verified, the weight of circumstantial evidence was crushing. Kevin's secret dealings were no longer whispers. They were accusations, painted in broad strokes. For Tony, this wasn't business. This wasn't competition. This was betrayal. To see his own son tangled up in dealings with rivals, to hear his name carried in taverns as a man undermined by his heir, was a wound far deeper than any rivalry with Parker Schnabel or any grudge against claim jumpers. It was a strike at the heart of his empire, and it would not be ignored. True to his nature, Tony didn't lash out blindly. He didn't storm into camp and drag Kevin into the dirt. Not yet. First, he gathered information, as any warlord would, before crushing an uprising. Quietly, he put spotters along the key roads leading in and out of Dawson, men loyal only to him, tasked with watching the night traffic. Trucks were noted, drivers described, dirt samples taken from tires where they could. Fuel deliveries became a new battleground. Every invoice was double-checked, every gallon tracked. Tony demanded logs, signatures, receipts. If fuel vanished again, he would know exactly where and when. To the crew, it felt like paranoia, but to Tony, it was strategy. The Empire had sprung a leak, and he would trace it to its source. Dawson's taverns, once a place of bragging and storytelling, became Tony's hunting ground. Allies who owed him favors fed him whispers from the shadows, who Kevin was seen with, which rival claims had sudden unexplained surges in activity, which shipments came through at odd hours, exchanged in cash, never declared. Piece by piece, Tony built his map of betrayal, each thread tying back to his son. The trap was not yet sprung, but it was closing. Tony knew Kevin was moving, but Kevin didn't know Tony was watching. Every night, Kevin thought himself clever, slipping further into his secret empire. Tony's net tightened. Each step Kevin took toward freedom was one step closer to walking straight into the snare his father was laying. The Beets camp felt it too. The arguments, the silences, the divided loyalties, they all carried the charge of something about to break. The rift had widened into a chasm, and now the king of the Klondike was preparing to strike back. The tension simmered through the night, carrying into the first light, until every eye in camp sensed that the moment of reckoning had arrived. Tensions reached a boiling point during the morning gold weigh. The sluice was loaded, pay dirt spilling into the trough, but Tony's eyes were fixed, cold, and sharp. When the tally came in, the numbers didn't lie. Ounces were missing, just enough to spark fury, just enough to confirm every suspicion that had been growing for weeks. Tony's voice cut across the camp, booming and unforgiving. "Kevin, you're holding back gold again." Kevin didn't flinch. He met his father's glare with equal fire. "I'm done being a pawn, Tony. You treat me like I don't matter. I'm not just your worker, I'm your son, and I deserve a say in this operation." The words struck hard, echoing across the frozen camp like a shot in the night. Crews froze mid-step, watching as the tension snapped from simmering anger to outright confrontation. What followed wasn't subtle. Equipment slammed against each other as Tony gestured violently, shovels rattling, buckets clattering. Kevin shoved back, the physicality of the dispute amplifying the verbal war. Voices, raw and angry, ricocheted off the corrugated metal of the sluice sheds, carrying over the frozen creek where men had been working quietly just moments before. Every watcher in the camp understood the stakes. This wasn't just a fight over ounces. This was the Beets empire itself, teetering on the edge of collapse. Men who had once followed orders without question now hesitated. Some glanced nervously at Tony, unsure if loyalty to the king could outweigh the family strife unfolding before them. Others looked to Kevin, sensing a leader emerging from the shadows, a figure willing to challenge centuries of authority for his own chance at power. Silence and tension hung heavy as father and son squared off, the once invisible line between heir and king now drawn in raw, undeniable conflict. Meanwhile, the rest of the Klondike noticed the tremors. Rival miners, long envious of the Beets operation, circled like wolves, waiting for weakness to show. Word of the confrontation spread faster than a wildfire in dry brush. Investors whispered to one another, wary of placing capital into an operation fractured at its core. Crews, loyal to Kevin's vision of independence, began quietly shifting labor and resources to the Hunker Creek claim, deepening the split that had been growing for months. Tony's iron grip, once absolute, began to loosen under the pressure of both betrayal and opportunistic rivals. Every day brought new threats. Trucks were diverted, pay dirt was siphoned, and whispers became public knowledge. Tony's name, once synonymous with invincibility in the Yukon, suddenly carried a note of vulnerability. He moved through camp with a careful gaze, calculating and measured, watching who spoke to whom, who lingered at Kevin's side, who shifted allegiances silently under his nose. Even the men he trusted most were tested as loyalties became fluid, shifting with the wind and rumors, with every ounce of gold hiding a story of divided ambition. Kevin, emboldened by whispers and unseen allies, pressed the advantage where he could. Each small victory in Hunker Creek, each ounce of gold funneled away from Tony's main operation, became proof of his rising influence. The camp began to feel like two operations under one roof, both vying for attention, control, and respect. Minor disputes over machinery and scheduling were amplified into battles of authority. The lines of command blurred, the hierarchy fractured. The empire Tony had built with decades of ruthless precision now operated on borrowed cohesion, its foundation threatened by ambition, secrecy, and greed. Photos and leaked records fed the fire further. Word spread of Kevin's ongoing secret deals, fuel depots visited under cover of night, trucks crossing claim lines unrecorded, gold shipped outside regulated channels. To outsiders, it was evidence of Kevin's cunning. To Tony, it was a dagger, each revelation a reminder that the heir had chosen defiance over loyalty. And while Tony prepared his next moves, the atmosphere in the camp grew electric, everyone aware that the coming days would determine the fate of the family dynasty. The confrontation escalated again at the way station later that week. Tony demanded accounts of every ounce, every scoop, every load. Kevin's responses, calm yet defiant, challenged authority while highlighting the gaps Tony had suspected for weeks. Words flared into action. As shovels and equipment rattled, crew members pulled back, and the camp became a stage for a silent war. No one could ignore the magnitude of the conflict. The fight was no longer between father and son, but between two visions of the same empire. One sought preservation, the other change. Beyond the immediate camp, the Klondike responded in kind. Rival operations increased their output, sensing an opening. Investors hesitated, redirecting funds to claims that promised stability. Local crews adjusted, quietly following Kevin where opportunity promised faster returns. Every ounce of gold siphoned into Hunker Creek. Every report that bypassed Tony's ledger undermined his authority. The operation's perception of invincibility cracked, revealing the vulnerability beneath decades of iron-fisted control. The Klondike itself seemed to reflect the tension, a frozen landscape hiding undercurrents of danger, of greed, of ambition. Every move, every ounce of gold, every whispered conversation could become a turning point. And as father and son faced each other across camps, the question of ultimate control remained unanswered, the outcome uncertain, and the empire's fate suspended in the raw tension of betrayal, strategy, and ambition.